She doesn't need it. She has a salary. My brother said that at my father's funeral. Not at the reception, not in private. He said it standing next to the casket, loud enough for our aunt to nod in agreement, loud enough for me to hear every syllable across a room that still smelled like lilies and grief. I didn't say anything. I just looked at the mahogany box that held what was left of my father and decided that silence was the only language worth speaking that day. My name is Claire. I was 28 years old when my father died, and 29 when I learned that the people who carry your blood can carry knives just as easily. My father, Robert, spent 32 years building a commercial real estate portfolio in central Ohio. He was not a flashy man. He drove the same Buick for 11 years. He packed his own lunch in a brown paper bag even after the business started turning real profit. He used to say that the quietest people in the room were usually the ones who understood the most. I think about that now more than I ever did when he was alive. There were three of us, my older brother Derek, my younger sister Paige, and me in the middle. Derek had always been the one our father brought to meetings, the one whose name got mentioned when clients asked about succession. I never resented that. Derek was 12 years older than me, had an MBA, and had genuinely worked in the business for years. What I didn't understand until much later was that working in something and belonging to something are not the same thing. My father got sick in the spring. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that doesn't ask your permission before it starts making decisions. By September, he was gone, and by October, we were all sitting in the offices of Halbrook and Finch on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Columbus, waiting for an attorney named Mr. Finch to tell us what was left. Paige sat next to me. She was 24, still finishing her graduate degree, still the kind of person who believed that family meant something because no one had given her enough evidence yet to think otherwise. She kept smoothing the hem of her blazer like she was trying to press the nervousness out of it. Derek sat across from us with his wife, Sandra. Sandra had the particular posture of someone who has already decided how a conversation is going to end. Mr. Finch opened a leather folder and put on his reading glasses. He was a careful man, the kind who paused before every sentence, which I had always found reassuring. That afternoon, I found it unbearable. He began reading the properties, the accounts, the assets, and one by one, I watched everything my father had spent 32 years building get listed with a number next to it and then get attributed to a trust that had been modified 11 months before my father's death. A revocable living trust, amended and restated, with Derek named as sole trustee and primary beneficiary. A token amount to Paige, a token amount to me. Not nothing, just something small enough to be an insult wrapped in the language of legal documents. Paige made a sound I had never heard from her before. Not crying exactly. Something quieter and more permanent than that. Derek leaned back in his chair. Dad wanted the business to stay intact, he said. To no one in particular. The way people say things they've rehearsed so many times they forget they're still performing. It made sense to consolidate. Sandra touched his arm the way people touch something they already own. I did not speak. I looked at Mr. Finch, who was looking at his folder with the careful attention of a man who has learned that sometimes the most professional thing you can do is not make eye contact. I asked one question on the way out. I asked Mr. Finch when the trust amendment had been filed. He told me November of the previous year. I asked him if my father had come in person. He said the documents had been submitted by courier, with notarized signatures. I said thank you. I walked to the elevator. Paige cried the whole way down. I did not. I went home and I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I teach 7th grade English in a suburb outside Columbus. I make $43,000 a year. I have student loans and a used Honda and a one-bedroom apartment that I love because I chose everything in it myself. My father knew all of that. My father used to call me on Sunday evenings and ask about my students by name because I had mentioned them once, months before, and he had written them down. He knew me. That was the thing I kept coming back to. He knew me, and what I had just been handed in that office did not feel like something that came from a man who knew me. He had given me something else, though. 6 weeks before he died, when I drove down to see him and we sat on his back porch in the early October cold because he still wanted to be outside, he gave me an envelope. He told me to keep it somewhere I wouldn't lose it. He told me it wasn't legal in the formal sense, but that it was true, and sometimes the truth needed a place to live while everything else got sorted out. I had put it in the fireproof box under my bed where I keep my passport and my lease. That night, I took it out and read it again. It was a letter. 3 pages, handwritten, dated September 2nd. In it, my father described what he intended. The business, he wrote, should be managed by Derek, but the proceeds should be divided equally between all 3 of his children. The property on Lakeview Drive, he wanted to go to me specifically because I had sat with him on that porch every Sunday for the last 4 years, and he wanted me to have somewhere that felt like home. He described a savings account and a brokerage account that together held just over $412,000 to be split 3 ways. He signed it with the same signature he used on birthday cards, the one that looked nothing like an official signature and exactly like my father. I sat there for a while longer. Then I started making some calls. The first person I called was a woman named Donna, who had been my father's personal assistant for 9 years. Donna was not emotional about things as a rule. She was organized and precise, and she had sent me a sympathy card with a handwritten note that was so specific and accurate about who my father was that I had kept it. I asked Donna one question. Had she noticed anything unusual in the months before my father died? She was quiet for longer than I expected. Then she said, "Claire, he couldn't type anymore by November. His hands, the tremors had gotten bad. He was dictating everything to me by October." I asked her if she had helped him prepare any legal documents in October or November. She said no. I said thank you, and I ended the call, and I sat with that for a moment. A man with tremors bad enough that he couldn't type was supposed to have submitted a notarized trust amendment by courier in November. A man who called me every Sunday was supposed to have signed over almost everything to one child without telling the others. A man who wrote 3 pages by hand in September was supposed to have changed his mind 2 months later. None of those things fit inside the same story. I called a different attorney, not Halbrook and Finch, someone I found on my own, a woman named Patricia Osei, who specialized in estate litigation and who had an office that smelled like coffee and who listened to everything I said without interrupting. She asked if I had the handwritten letter. I said yes. She asked if there was anyone who could speak to my father's physical condition in October and November. I said yes. She said, "Good. Now I need you to think about your father's email. Did he use personal email or did everything go through the business?" I told her he had a personal Gmail account that he had used for family correspondence. She asked if I had access to it. I said I had known his password since he set up the account 8 years ago because he couldn't remember passwords, and I had been the one who helped him create it. She told me to log in and look carefully at everything from September through November. She said to look specifically at anything involving attorneys, notaries, or the trust. I went home. I logged into my father's Gmail. I searched, and I found something. Or rather, I found the absence of something. There were emails from August. There were emails from early September. Then there was a gap. November had almost nothing. And what was there was sparse and strange, and the writing cadence was different from every other email my father had ever sent. Shorter sentences, no gentle asides, none of the small, personal observations he added to everything. But Patricia had told me something else. She said Gmail keeps deleted emails in the trash for 30 days and then they're gone from the visible interface. But she said that if an account had Google Workspace or certain sync settings enabled, there were sometimes recoverable records through the account activity log. I went to the account settings. I looked at the activity history, and there it was. A series of emails had been deleted from the account in December, 6 weeks after my father died. Not before, after. Deleted from a device that was not my father's laptop. Deleted from an IP address that, when I ran it through a simple lookup tool, resolved to a residential address in Worthington, Ohio. Derek and Sandra lived in Worthington, Ohio. I forwarded everything to Patricia. She told me not to say a word to Derek. She told me to keep the letter somewhere safe and to write down everything Donna had told me while it was still fresh. She said these things took time, but that what I had was more than most people walked in with. I want to tell you that I was calm through all of this. I was not always calm. There were nights I sat in my car in the parking lot outside my apartment building because I didn't want to cry inside where my neighbors might hear. There were mornings I showed up to teach 32 12-year-olds about metaphor and tone while carrying something that had no language I was allowed to use yet. Paige knew something was happening. I told her to trust me and to wait, and she did, because Paige has always been the kind of person who could hold on to difficult things with both hands without dropping them. Derek texted me twice in this period. Once to ask if I had any of Dad's personal files at my place. Once to ask if I had ever had access to Dad's email. I responded to both with one word each. The first, no. The second, why? He did not respond to why. Patricia filed a petition to contest the trust amendment 4 months after the reading. The grounds were undue influence, lack of testamentary capacity, and fraudulent execution. She had Donna's statement. She had my father's medical records documenting the progression of his tremors. She had the handwritten letter with a forensic analysis confirming it matched my father's handwriting from other authenticated samples, and was written within the time frame the letter claimed. And she had the account activity records showing that emails had been deleted from my father's account after his death from a device linked to my brother's home network. We did not confront Derek at a dramatic family dinner. There was no screaming in a living room, no moment where I threw documents across a table. What actually happened was quieter and more complete. Derek hired an attorney who was expensive and loud in the way that expensive attorneys sometimes are when they are trying to substitute volume for substance. There were filings and counterfilings and a mediation session that went nowhere because Derek's position required him to claim that our father, a man who had been dictating correspondence to his assistant because he couldn't type, had personally prepared and couriered a complex legal document to be notarized without telling anyone, without Donna's involvement, without a single email trail. The notary who had supposedly witnessed the signatures was interviewed. She had no memory of my father specifically. She had notarized a high volume of documents that year. She could not confirm the person who presented the ID was the person in the photo. She had not, she acknowledged, required the signer to be present in all cases, which was a violation of Ohio notary law. That detail, that small procedural failure, was the thread that everything unraveled from. The forensic document examiner testified that the signature on the trust amendment showed inconsistencies with my father's known signatures from the same period, specifically the kind of inconsistencies you see when someone attempts to replicate a signature they've seen many times but cannot fully reproduce the muscle memory of. Derek's attorney stopped being loud somewhere around the third month of proceedings. Patricia was very measured about all of this. She did not predict outcomes or make promises, but she told me that the standard for undue influence in Ohio requires demonstrating that the person had the opportunity to exert influence, a motive, and evidence that the document does not reflect the actual wishes of the deceased. We had all three. The morning the mediation agreement was reached, I was sitting in Patricia's conference room with a cup of coffee I hadn't touched. Paige was next to me. We had been there for 2 hours. Derek and Sandra were in a separate room down the hall. I did not see their faces when the agreement was signed. I did not need to. The terms, the trust amendment, was set aside. The estate was to be administered according to the original trust document from 4 years prior, which divided assets 3 ways. The property on Lakeview Drive was addressed through my father's handwritten letter, which the mediator agreed carried significant moral weight, even without formal legal standing, and which Derek did not contest once the other documents collapsed. The deleted emails, the IP records, the notary irregularities, none of it ever went to a judge. Derek agreed to the settlement before that happened. His attorney's fees alone were somewhere in the range of $200,000. He paid them himself. There is a referral to the county prosecutor's office still pending, related to the notary violations and the question of who submitted those documents. Patricia told me that process moves slowly and I should not hold my breath. I am not holding my breath. I am just making sure I have answered every question I've been asked. Paige got enough to finish her degree without loans and start the thing she's been wanting to start. I got the property on Lakeview Drive and a third of an estate that turned out to be worth more than any of us had fully understood, because our father was even quieter about his finances than he was about everything else. I have not spoken to Derek since the mediation. He sent me a text 3 weeks after it concluded. It said, "I hope you're happy." I read it once, and then I set my phone face down on the table, and I let the silence do what silence does. I still teach 7th grade. I still drive the used Honda. I am in the process of deciding what to do with a piece of property in central Ohio that has a back porch where I spent 4 years of Sunday evenings with a man who wrote things down because he knew the truth needed somewhere to live. I had a student this year who wrote in an essay that the hardest thing about being honest is that you sometimes have to be patient while the dishonest people are still winning. She was 12 years old. I gave her full marks and wrote in the margin, "You are more right than you know." My father used to say that you don't build something worth having by telling people about it. You build it quietly, and you let it speak when the time is right. The trust amendment was filed on November 14th. The handwritten letter was dated September 2nd. Between those 2 dates, my father called me 5 times. He asked about my students. He asked if I was getting enough sleep. He asked, on the last call, whether I still had the envelope he gave me. I told him it was safe. He said, "Good." That was the whole conversation. 3 sentences, the shortest call we ever had, and the one I returned to most. I still don't know exactly how much he knew, or how much he suspected. I don't know if he had looked at Derek and seen what I eventually found in the account logs. I don't know if the letter was a precaution or a certainty. What I know is that he gave it to me. Not to Derek, who had the MBA. Not to Paige, who was closest to him in temperament. To me, the one in the middle. The one with the one-bedroom apartment and the used Honda and the students whose names he had written down. He knew exactly what he was doing. The day I got the keys to the Lakeview Drive property, I went there alone in the late afternoon when the light comes in low across the back porch. I sat in the same chair I had always sat in. I brought nothing with me. I didn't take any pictures. I just sat there until it was dark. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to throw something away when someone tells you it isn't worth keeping. Sometimes that is enough.